Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Welcome to Politics Done Right on KPFT. Houston, this is your community radio station. Anyhow, yours, and yours. Folks, today we have a great show for you. We have two special guests. We have Harris County District Clerk Marilyn Burgess, and we have Professor Dr. Richard Wolff. He's going to be here to discuss quite a bit. Anyway, Harris County District Clerk Marilyn Burgess is determined to make the county's jury system more representative of its ethnic makeup. She launched a comprehensive outreach campaign to increase jury participation in Harris County, particularly among African Americans and Hispanics. Under the message, stand for justice, participate in jury service. And of course, thereafter we'll have Professor Dr. Richard Wolff. He didn't mince his words about capitalism, COVID, and more with the release of his book, The Sickness is the System, in ebook form. Was the 2020 crash caused by COVID-19? Was it just a trigger to an already unstable system? But folks, before we get started, you know we are in fund drive mode. But we're going to interrupt just a few times because we have a very full program. By the way, we have a special offer by Teresa Allen. Go ahead, and if you can get us up to $500 or more, we will get a match-in to Northwest Assistant Ministries, NAM, which does great work here in Houston, especially with this freeze. They help people get fed, clothed, and water, and all that good stuff. So you go ahead and support Politics Done Right on KPFT, and she's going to make a matching offer to, where again? NAM. So folks, please be careful. Please be a part of the solution. Anyway, we have great not prizes. What am I talking about? We have great offers for you. Well, you know, you're going to be paying more than it's worth, than the book is worth, but this to help KPFT. We have, as I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. If you get that book, it's a contribution of $120. You can also get my latest book, which is It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors. That one is also for an offer of $120. And guess what? You get both of them for an offer of $200. So folks, please remember, what you're doing is you are making sure KPFT stays on air. You are making sure that we have this public station that can give you information as it should be. Information that it's truthful, information that's not fake news. Anyhow, I have some great people to thank. I want to thank Kenneth Jenkins for your kind contribution from Houston, Texas. Of course, there's also Dan Limbaugh from Magnolia, Texas. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so kindly for your support. Claudio Arena, Sugarland, Texas, thank you so kindly for your support. Brian Smith, Houston, Texas, thank you so kindly for your support. And of course, our one great donor of all the times on, Bruce Pollard. Thank you so kindly for your contribution. But you know what? It's time for us to get busy. You call 713-526-5738. Again, that number is 713-526-5738. As well, please, folks, you can go ahead and make the contribution in the name of Politics Done Right for KPFT at kpft.org. That is kpft.org. But you can call right now, 713-526-5738. Tell them that you want As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, for a contribution of $120, or It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Neighbors, Friends, and Relatives, for a contribution of $120, or both for a contribution of $200. Folks, we're going to get busy. We have a full program here, so let's get it on. Today we have a very special guest, one of our wonderful. I don't think she considers herself a politician, though we know that they must be. But anyway, Harris County District Clerk Marilyn Burgess, thank you so kindly for being here on Politics Done Right.
Good afternoon, Umberto, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So look, Marilyn, first of all, what does a county clerk, district clerk do?
The district clerk is basically the administrator over the courts for Harris County. We supply the courtrooms with court clerks. We record all the filings, accept all the filings. We accept the payment of the fees and fines that are assessed. We maintain court registry where property is in dispute, like we have recently had a very expensive stamp collection that we were holding while it was being disputed. And we are responsible for the jury summoning process.
And henceforth, the purpose of this discussion, I think, as it turns out, you have an initiative. I think it's probably an initiative that has never been done before here in Harris County, which I found to be excellent. You are trying to reach out. I tell you what, I think it's called Harris. The press release says Harris County District Clerk Marilyn Burgess launches comprehensive outreach campaign to increase jury participation. When I saw that, I'm like, I'm on board. I think this is something that we need because we really need a jury that looks like society. So why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, this campaign, which we call Stand for Justice, is being launched because we are trying to increase jury participation in Harris County. Our participation rate for the last decade has been extremely poor in Harris County, hovering in the low 20%. That means 80% of the people who receive a summons don't show up. And so we're trying to get that appearance rate up, and we're focusing primarily on minority communities where they are underrepresented because we want to get that on par with, so our juries look like the citizens of Harris County. Over 60% of Harris County people that are eligible to serve on jury are non-white, but our jury appearance rate, 55% of the people that show up are white. So we're trying to get that more balanced, and so that the juries really do guarantee a defendant a right to a jury by a trial of their peers and looks like them and has the diversity that reflects the wonderful diversity of Harris County.
Now, why do you think there's that difference in based on population where you have a 60% minority population, but you have a 55% white jury pool? Why do you think that is what you're seeing?
Well, there's a lot of reasons that people don't show up, and there are financial barriers, there's just personal inconvenience, and there's some of the reasons that we got when we conducted our survey, but a lot of it is just because the people find it inconvenient. But a lot of them in the minority communities, you find a lot of people who distrust the justice system, and they don't want to be a part of it. If you've had a bad encounter with the justice system, you're not so sure you want to walk into a courtroom where a lot of people are walking around with a gun on their hip. But the big thing is that a lot of people just can't afford to serve as a juror. If you're an hourly paid worker who's living paycheck to paycheck and you go to jury duty, that means you're not going to get paid for that day. You can't afford it. And so what we're looking at is going to court and asking for an increase in the pay for jurors, because if we want people to show up, we've got to adequately compensate them for their time.
Now, you talk about that. Are some employers responsible for giving, for paying their employees even if they serve on a jury?
A lot are. A lot of the big companies do. If I go to jury duty, I'm still going to get paid by my employer. But if you're working at McDonald's or a construction worker or mom and pop business who can't afford to pay that, then those are the people that can't afford to show up. So it's the lower socioeconomic groups that have a harder time appearing for jury duty. And so that's one of the things that we've heard when we did our survey was, I just can't afford to come. So.
Yeah, that is understandable. Well, I think there are other issues as well, things like parking, right? Because I know a couple of times that I showed up, it was like, okay, I showed up, I had to go pay for parking, I had to wait a while, and parking downtown is not all that cheap, right?
It is not at all cheap. I remember one time when I went downtown for jury duty before I was elected and had not spent a lot of time downtown, and I was running late, and there's this big cutoff of if you're not in the room by 8:15, you're going to have to reschedule and come back again. And so I knew there was a place I could go to park that would be cheaper parking for jurors, but I didn't know where that was, and I was running short on time. And so I pull into the first parking lot I find so that I can get into the building and make it on time. And my parking for the day was $25.
Oh,
My pay for the day was $6. So people are having to pay to serve on juries, and we've got to fix that.
wait a minute, wait a minute. $6. You
Yeah.
show up for jury duty, they give you $6?
The first day of service, you're paid $6, and that's paid by the county. If you're selected and you come back for subsequent days, it goes up to $40 per day. But if you can't afford to show up on day one, you're not going to be on that jury.
Absolutely not. My God, I didn't realize it was just $6. That is okay. I don't know where that came from, but that is sort of terrible. So how do you think you're going to be successful going to commissioner's court to get this taken care of, or?
I know that several of the members of the court have a commitment to improving our diversity on our juries. We all know what a difficult economic time we find ourselves in right now, and whether or not the funds can be made available to make a difference, I don't know. We're going to put it to them. I know they're interested in it, and if we can figure out a way to fund it, I think that they will do so.
Now, how much money are we talking about?
We're taking a lot of different options to them. At the low end, we would like for day one to be the $40 that you get for subsequent days. But we're going to present several options of different amounts, but until they agree on an amount, I'd rather not say what we're
Okay,
recommending.
I get it. That makes sense. You have to find a way to get it there. Now, you in other than pay, I think what you're trying to tell people out there is that there is a social reason, there's a societal reason that you should actually be a participant in the jury as a juror. Why don't you explain that for us?
Absolutely. You know, there are studies that show that the more diverse a jury, the longer their deliberations are. They ask more questions. They make fewer inaccurate statements. And when inaccurate statements are made, people correct those statements. And that leads to fairer outcomes. And you have to recognize that everybody that comes to that deliberation table comes with a different life experience. So how I might look at a situation as a 60-something white woman from an affluent neighborhood is real different than how a 20-something-year-old African-American male from a poorer neighborhood would look at the evidence that's presented to them. And having that diversity and having that conversation that goes on in the deliberation room is what leads us to fairer outcomes. And we need everybody at the table. We need people to participate in order to deliver fair justice to everyone.
You know, I wonder why it is so hard for people to be empathetic. And that is one thing I've got to give you. And I mean, putting out policies of this type, you don't really have anybody out there per se asking for it. I know there are activist groups that would come out and say we need X, Y, and Z, but to just come out and have an initiative like this, I think is very, very commendable. So it is very commendable. And when we see public officials do things like this, it proves to us that government works when we have the right people in government. And given that we, the people, are or is government, that is what we should all strive for. Get away from all the crazy politics. And I mean, I love what I'm hearing thus far. How are you advertising what you're doing?
Okay, we have a comprehensive campaign going on with 3 billboards. We've targeted areas of the county where our participation rates are very low. As I said, our overall rate is hovering around 23%, but we have areas of town where the response rate is 9%.
Oh,
And then we have areas where it's as high as 36%, but that's about as high as it gets. So our billboards are in areas of town where the participation rate is low. We have 3 of them. One is at 59 and Cross Timbers. One of them is on the east side at I-10, just south of I-10 on Federal Road. And then one at 610 in the South Loop at Scott. We also have a PSA that we've asked our media partners to help us get out that talks about why we need everybody from all walks of life. And we're looking at diversity from a standpoint of ethnicity as well as age. The vast majority of our jurors that appear are in the 50+ age range. We need that 18 to 30-year range showing up as well. So we've got a lot of social media that we're doing outreach to and trying to promote our campaign and let people know how important it is for them to serve. We've done some things with one of the major reasons that people tell us they don't answer their call is they feel like that jury service is a waste of their time. And the reason they do is because in 2019, which is the last year we have normal jury statistics for, 37% of the people who did show up got dismissed without ever being sent to a courtroom because we didn't need them. And the reason that happens is because the system that's been being used forever in Harris County doesn't call people based on what trials we have scheduled. It's just on Mondays, we call 1,000 people. On Tuesday, we call 800 people. We don't even know if there's going to be a trial that day or not. So we're trying to implement a system that would allow us to call jurors for specific trials. And we've implemented that partially where you have to go online now to pre-register for jury service. And when you do that, we get your email and your cell phone number so that we can text you and email you reminders of your service. And we send out an email reminder a week before and a text and an email the night before so that you don't forget that you have the jury service. In the past, we sent out a letter to you that you got in the mail and you were told to show up somewhere 4 to 6 weeks from now. We just had to hope you remembered and showed up that day. Now we can send you those reminders. But more importantly, if we find out we don't need you because there aren't any trials scheduled for that day, we can cancel your service and text you and say, you've been dismissed, you don't need to show up. So you're not making a needless trip downtown and spending 3 to 4 hours just to be told, we don't need you after all. So if you show up, we're going to use you and you're going to be a part of the system and you're going to be able to contribute. And I think that's going to make a big difference too.
Absolutely so. Ms. Burgess, you're the Harris County District Clerk, but this isn't something that only affects Harris County. Have you been in touch with other clerks around the country where you guys have actually seen this? And have you been able to give advice to others? Because this is a problem that I imagine is a national problem, and that you are doing something like this to take care of it in a big county like Harris County. You would expect it to be done or to be considered in other places. Have you talked to your compatriots in other counties as well throughout the country?
Actually, when I first came into office in January of 2019, the last week of January, I made a trip with some of my staff and one of the judges to Austin, to Travis County, because they already have been utilizing an electronic jury summonsing process there for over 20 years, very successfully. And so instead of having 37% show up that you don't need and getting a 23% appearance rate, they're getting about 80% showing up.
Wow.
Of who they have had pre-register. That's what we're aiming for. And we looked at their system. We brought it back to Harris County. Our IT department has developed the first phase of it to implement it. So Harris County is kind of behind the ball on this one. There are several counties around the state that are already using the electronic summonsing process and have seen dramatic good results. We are leading the charge on trying to get the pay up. Most of the counties across the state pay that $6 on day one because that's the legislatively mandated minimum. So if we can implement this and see a big change in our appearance rates and our diversity rates, then maybe we can share that with the counties across the state and they can do something similar.
That's what good governance is all about. What didn't I ask you that you would have liked me to ask you?
What? Well, let's see.
And if I've asked you everything, it's okay.
I think we've covered it all pretty much. We are mailing out 27,000 summons next week. And these summons will be going out for people to appear in the early part of April. And so watch your mail, answer your summons, go online and pre-register. If you don't have access to online, you can call our jury room and we will register you over the phone. But we need you. And the other big thing is the only way you're going to get your summons if you move is if you do a change of address with the post office. So if you're someone who moves around a lot, that's part of the reason that we don't have the appearance rate that we want. And it particularly affects minorities because they seem to move more often. So if your mailing address isn't current and we send you a summons, you're not going to show up because you don't get that summons. So keep your mailing address updated too.
Harris County District Clerk Marilyn Burgess, first of all, thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for the work that you put in. Thank you for the changes that you're making. I think if we can continue to get good governance, both at the county level, at the state level, and at the national level, we can actually change this country. And it starts with public servants doing what you do. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to see you.
Don't forget, folks, KPFT needs you now. KPFT needs your support now. Support us now. The offers that we have is, as I see it, class warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom. Good offer of $120, and it's worth it. How to talk to your right-wing relatives, friends, and neighbors, $120 contribution, or both of them for a $200 contribution. Remember, we have a matching offer for NAM, so please go ahead and call right now, 713-526-5738, 713-526-5738, or go to kpft.org. Make this contribution in the name of Politics Done Right for KPFT. Back to... Folks, we have a gem for you today. Dr. Richard D. Wolff is Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor in the graduate program in International Affairs of the New School University, New York City. He is the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book is The Sickness is the System When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and is available along with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. For those of you who are not new to Politics Done Right, you know we've covered this book before, but he's released it as an ebook now. Welcome to Politics Done Right, Richard Wolff. How are you doing today?
Okay, Egbert, glad to be here.
Absolutely. So now, first of all, before we get into the pandemic, before we get into any of these other issues, have you heard about ERCOT in Texas and the blackouts in Texas? Just off the wall, I wondered if you heard about it.
Yes, I have. I've heard all about it. I've been following it. And I've got to tell you, for me, it really is connected in a particular way to COVID-19 and to the economic disaster we are living through. And here's the way. There really is no excuse for not being prepared. I mean, this has to be called out for what it is. Every 4 to 7 years, the capitalist economic system crashes. Sometimes the crashes are deep and last a long time. Sometimes they're shallow and they don't. But every 4 to 7 years, suddenly, people are thrown out of work, businesses cut back, communities don't get the tax revenue they need. We know this. It's been true for hundreds of years. There's no excuse not to be prepared. Second example, we have had viruses from the beginning of the human race, if not long before. You know, we had a horrible one back in 1918 that killed 700,000 people in America. We've had SARS and MERS and Ebola. We know that the human community is at risk from viruses that can do terrible damage. You have to be prepared for that if you aren't crazy. That's what we have a government for. And here's the last one. The state of Texas has been subject to extremes of weather in the summer, incredible heat waves. which guess what? Use a lot of electricity. Okay, this time they have something a bit more unusual, the other end, cold. But since they use electricity, it must have dawned on somebody with a third grade education that you need to have standby capacity to handle unexpected demands, whether it's heat or it's cold or anything else. There is no excuse. I noticed Governor Abbott immediately did what I call the Trump dance. He discovered some obscure council in Texas and blamed them. It's like Trump blaming poor immigrants coming from Latin America or the Chinese, or I mean, it is this unspeakable failure not to be prepared when there's no excuse, and then finding somebody to scapegoat for it. It really is a sign of a society that is in deep trouble and not getting better.
You know, Dr. Wolff, in you explaining that there are a lot of issues here in Texas with them not wanting regulations, and you talk about capitalism. I covered this on our program, in fact, just before this show with you today, in that all our endemics, all the things that we've had so far, the system that says we want less regulations, we want less control, we want less taxes, they continue to cause us more harm. In Texas, as we had, the windmills froze because they didn't put the right windmills in. The gas lines froze because they didn't put the right regulations to run the gas right now. We don't have a capacity issue in Texas. We have a regulation issue. We have what I call a capitalism issue. Now, let's get on to what your this book is, because the table of content is self-explanatory. I mean, everybody needs to just see the table of contents, and then they're going to want to go ahead and get the book right away. And it starts out with one thing: capitalism crashes again. And COVID-19 was not the trigger. I was so happy you stated that, because before COVID-19, we covered on Politics Done Right why it was imminent that this economic system was going to have a crash pretty darn soon. Why don't you bring some meat to that theory?
Okay, I'd be glad to. Let me begin by surprising some people. Not only are you right in what you just said, but if you were reading the financial press, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, Bloomberg News, any of them, you would have known that in the years 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, the financial press that loves capitalism was all speculating, because they know that it crashes every 4 to 7 years. They know that the last crash was in 2008. So do the math. If it's 4 to 7 years and the last one was in 2008, as soon as you're in 2016, you're over the average. And so it's now becoming a betting game as to when the inevitable will come. Everybody was expecting it. And as each year went by, we reminded one another, those of us who work in this business, that there's a sad reality, which is if you have longer than average between your crisis, it usually means that the crisis, when it hits, will be worse than if it had hit more on schedule. You know, it's like not going to the doctor for your checkup and then going 2 years later and being told by the doctor, it would have been a lot better if I had seen you sooner. It's the same kind of thing. So for me, it's crystal clear. If it hadn't been COVID, it would have been something else. And the way to prove it is to remind people, this is the third crash of capitalism in the 21st century. The first one was in the spring of 2000. It got the name of the dot-com crisis.
Right.
All right. In 2008, we had the second one. It got the name subprime mortgage crisis. And so this one gets the name COVID-19. But you notice something? 3 crises. We're 21 years into the century. That works out to an average of every 7 years, just like we know. There's no surprise. The COVID-19 is not the problem we have. It makes our problem worse, no question. I mean, you know, in the Great Depression, we had a terrible crash in the 1930s, but at least we didn't have a terrible public health disaster at the same time. This time, we are in really deep territory, uncharted territory. We've never done this before. We have an economic crash, and a big one, and we have a once-in-a-century public health catastrophe, and they're happening at the same time. Each one makes the other one worse. But you're not going to fool anybody, and you're certainly not going to solve a problem if what you think is going on is a bad disease. No, 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 no. There is certainly a bad disease, but that's why I titled the book what it is. The real disease we have to worry about is the one that crashes every 4 to 7 years.
And you know what else, doctor? And please put some meat on this for me. As we, first of all, after we got informed about this disease, it seemed like it was in the interest of some that this disease further metastasized, because it has become a wealth transfer engine, and more than a wealth transfer engine, a method for taking the money of most, the incomes of most, up to a select few. Amazon is now even bigger as mom and pops are gone. Right. Walmart is even bigger as others that were in the market were told to close. There was no governmental support to really keep these things, to keep a status quo until the pandemic was over. Why don't you tell me why it is that only with something other than capitalism that you can actually have a system that takes care of who we should be taking care of, humanity?
All right, let me start with the inequality. You are absolutely right. There are two kinds of inequality that are being heavily increased or worsened during this pandemic/economic crash. The first one is the inequality between labor and capital, between people who live by working and people who are sitting at the top of the economic pyramid. I mean, and nothing is easier than for me to give you a couple of examples. We currently have roughly 65, and this is a number people should think about, 65 million Americans have filed for unemployment compensation at one time or another since March of last year. Some of them have been unemployed the entire time. Others have only been unemployed a few weeks and everything in between. But here's something to remember. If you're unemployed, and if you have to wait a couple of weeks or more to get your unemployment compensation, and even if you do, you're going to be in trouble financially. You're going to have to take whatever savings you have and use them up. You're going to have to lean on your relatives, your friends, your neighbors to help you at a time when they're in financial squeeze time as well. So you have really whacked the working class. 65 million people unemployed. That's more, much more than a third of the labor force in this country. More than 1 out of 3 have been through that experience over the last 11 months. That is a staggering reality. At the same time, I'm going to give you 2 examples. Jeffrey Bezos, I'll pick him out, the head of Amazon, saw his wealth go from roughly $125 billion, that's with a B, up to around $200 billion. Okay, this is more money than any, you'd have to go back to ancient Egypt and the pharaohs to get this kind of, look at what I just told you. 65 million people really giving up pretty much whatever safety cushion of money they might have had, desperate in many cases, not knowing how long this will last, how bad it'll be, whether that job will even be there when it's over. I mean, and then other people becoming wildly wealthy. Here's a second example. I took the 15 most successful hedge funds on Wall Street, and I asked the question, how did they do during the year 2020? Because we now have the results. Okay. Of the top 15, and there are many more, there's 1,000 of them, but the top 15, number 15 earned $846 million. Number one earned 3 billion with a B.
Wow.
Now, to help people understand what it means, I know it's difficult. Here's what I did. I asked myself, if this gentleman got $3 billion, how much does that work out per week for a 52-week year? So here's your answer. Excess of $52 million a week. He doesn't buy lottery tickets, and because he doesn't need to. He wins the lottery every day without buying a ticket, because he's the other side of the coin of the millions of us who buy an occasional ticket and never win anything or not enough to make a difference. So you're making inequality much, much worse between those at the top who own shares, who are the people who, the tiny minority who sit at the top, and the vast majority who don't. But there's a second example. Big business is destroying little business. The little businesses cannot survive this kind of situation. Something like a third to a half of all the restaurants that have had to close have closed permanently. They're not coming back. They're not making it on taking food out or prepare, none of that. That some of them are surviving on that, but they'll never get back to where they were. And the government help so far has been very, very inadequate. Again, a couple of examples. The government has postponed eviction. So if you're unable to pay your rent, or if you're unable to cover your mortgage, here's what happens. You can't be thrown out of your home, and that's now been extended into most of the rest of this year. But here's something to remember. Number one, all of those rents you didn't pay, you still owe them. Number two, the landlord is allowed to charge interest for you're not paying. So you owe the money on the rent plus the interest, plus the landlord is legally allowed to penalize you for not paying. So people who couldn't pay the rent are going to owe the accumulated rent plus interest plus penalty. This is ridiculous. They're going to arrive at some point down the road, 2 months, 6 months, 9 months from now, and we're going to be right back where we are now, having used up their savings. I mean, this is impossible. Now, let me give you the last of it. Many, many small businesses have not been paying their rent. Okay, that means the mall owner isn't getting his rental payments, and the building owner in which the store is located isn't getting their rental. Okay, they're not getting money. They're turning around to their banks holding mortgages and saying, I can't pay the monthly mortgage because I'm not getting the monthly rental from my tenants. So the catastrophe of the mass of people fearing eviction is multiplied by the catastrophe of the small businesses and the catastrophe of the landlords and the catastrophe of the government. What you're building up to, I don't mean to scare folks, but if I didn't tell you this honestly, what use would I be? You are accumulating too many problems. It would have been hard to solve any one of them, but you've got a dozen. The pandemic, all the damage done by the people who died and the people who got sick, and the economic crash, and now the accumulated non-rental payers and non-mortgage coverers and landlords and small business. It is not only unbearable, these are the vast majority. And they're going to be looking at the shrinking number of people doing really well, the Amazons, the Apples, all of that. And the gap between the experience of the two is going to be visible in a way that is going to drive people crazy. I would even argue, not that it's the most important thing, but part of the upset driving those crazy people on the 6th of January at the Capitol, part of it is their having a sense, rightly, that the economic system they thought they were living in isn't there, and it isn't about to be brought back, and that they're looking at an abyss into the future, and they want to do something. And yeah, they start thinking crazy stuff and QAnon and all the rest of that. But don't forget, at the base are human beings that are suffering, even if the way they handle it only makes it worse.
Just a short break in, folks. Please remember, give us a call at 713-526-5738. Again, that number is 713-526-5738. Look, we accept contributions of any size, any kind. Just call and tell them, this is what I want to contribute, or you can do it as well at kpft.org. But special for this show, we have, as I see it, class warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom, for a contribution of $120. And of course, we have it's worth it, how to talk to your right-wing relatives, friends, and neighbors, for a contribution of $120 as well. You can get them both for a contribution of $200. Remember, we have matching player. Teresa Allen is going to match what we get to this great service association, NAM. So please, again, call 713-526-5738. Again, that number is 713-526-5738, or go to kpft.org. Remember to let them know this is a contribution in the name of Politics Done Right for KPFT. Thank you so kindly. There's a part of your book, Capitalism and Pandemic, Social Illnesses That Affect Us All. And in there, you include all the isms that's used. And in fact, some of those people who attack the Capitol, instead of looking at the reasons for their demise, they've been taught otherwise. But before I go to the other question, because this is something that gets to me all of the times, because you brought it up when you talk about Jeff Bezos. When you talk about Jeff Bezos going from $120 billion to $200 billion, Americans were indoctrinated into believing that somehow, because somebody started something, I am an engineer, I created a product, that all the wherewithal from that product belongs to me, not taking into account that I was educated, Dr. Wolff, with the tax dollars that you paid, that all these things that gave me the ability to create something came from us all. So somehow now I am supposed to be worth all the billions that's generated from others who work my product. Why don't you explain a little bit where we have to change our frame of minds into not believing that our invention, our immediate success belong to us all, and all profits made from that belongs to that one individual, as opposed to the collective that's really where a society where all of this was created?
I'd be glad to. Let's start with the reality that whatever you think of Mr. Bezos, we'll stay with him, Jeff Bezos. He's as good an example as any of the others. Whatever you think his contribution was, there were millions of people for thousands of years who have developed over time the understanding of electricity, the understanding of mathematics, the understanding of what it means to organize a supply chain, to do all the work that goes into an Amazon delivery of a package. None of them are making money out of what they did. Mr. Bezos had a mother and a father, and Mr. Bezos had a school teacher, and Mr. Bezos had a dozen people that were important in his life, getting him to where he is. But we live in a system that doesn't have them share in the reward. Along the way, Amazon got all kinds of subsidies from governmental agencies to help them build a building, a road made to one of their distribution centers so the trucks could get in and out. Those are contributions to the success over time that he had. There's absolutely no reason to exclude all of the people who made contributions along the way, the other companies, the government agencies, the people who worked hard, the teachers, they get nothing out of all of this because of our peculiar system that gives it to one person. There's no need for that. If you want to recognize that he came up with, let's be very generous. He came up with a clever way to speed up package delivery. I mean, that's what he is. He delivers packages. He organized that. Good. Give him a reward. Give him a Nobel Prize. You know what the Nobel Prize is for a breakthrough in science? It's under $1 million. Give him that. Nobody would object. A good recognition of the fact that he was creative in a particular way. Give it to everybody who comes up with a really useful idea. There is no need and no justification to take away money from millions of people to give him not 1 million, but a $200 billion. And the only way you can do that is if there are people working day in and day out, producing more value than is paid to them in their wages, with the difference between what they add by their work versus what they get for working, that goes to Mr. Bezos, so he can collect a vast amount of money. It really is disgusting. And I mean that word because it's also now possible. And I want to drive it home again around Mr. Bezos, although we could use others. We have millions of people really suffering now. We have a catastrophe. Mr. Bezos didn't create the pandemic, but he is making a bundle. He didn't do anything to deserve the extra bundle. He's just sitting there with the right business purely by chance, whereas some other person working his or her tail off, running a small restaurant, is wiped out. It's not the fault of the people who got wiped out that there's a pandemic, and it's not the fault of Mr. Bezos, but one of them ends up with billions and the other one is ruined for life. A decent society wouldn't let that happen. You know, even Donald Trump referred to the struggle against pandemic by saying, it's like a war. It's like we're fighting a war. Well, let me remind Americans of something. The last time we fought a major war, World War II, we did not allow some people to earn billions. We had something called an excess profits tax. You got more than a certain amount, the government went and said, this is a national crisis. We're fighting against the fascists in Germany and in Italy and in Japan, and we're not going to allow some people to become billionaires and other people give their lives to fight in the war. That's an inequality we will not tolerate. So we also had a rationing system. We gave people tickets. And let me mention that. We gave people ration tickets. You couldn't go get a quart of milk or a pound of coffee or a gallon of gas for your car and simply give money. And the reason we did that was because those things are scarce in wartime. If we did that, the only people who could afford it would be the people who are rich. And that would destroy the solidarity of our country fighting a war. So here's what we're going to do. You want to buy a gallon of gas or a pound of coffee or a quarter pound of meat? You need a ration card printed by the government. And here comes the best part. You know how it was distributed, the ration card? According to people's needs. If you had a lot of kids in your family, you got more ration cards for milk. That way, rich people couldn't buy the milk for their pet rather than have human beings unable to give milk for growing children. We know what to do to handle a national crisis in a way that's fair. We've done that. This time we have a government, Republicans and Democrats, so totally controlled by corporations and the rich that they don't even discuss doing that, even though it's part of our history. For me, the scars from this inequality between big and small business, between workers and capitalists, those are going to run very deep and last very long. And they will shape our history long after COVID is a bad memory.
That is such a good point. Now it's interesting because we have a young we have a young woman, 29 years old, that runs the Harris County, Texas, the second largest county in the country. And what she has instituted for COVID-19 is that she's not going to force folks to just go ahead and type and refresh to get a vaccine. She made it equitable by saying everybody put in when they can, and it'll be a real lottery as far as who gets a vaccine first. Now, I call what you've just described, Dr. Wolff, antiseptic slavery, because it's a form of slavery that just a bit more palatable to people. And until we explain it that way to many, they don't get it. Now, how do we get around the indoctrination that we get into people into believing that your worth is something that you purported to create? We have to change the mindset of people into realizing what you've just stated. That is, it's a collective that have created a Bezos. It's a collective that have created every capitalist that think they did it on their own.
Right. That's always been true. I think the best way to understand it is to appeal to something I think is in most Americans, despite so many years of indoctrination. Somehow they know and they admire what it means to play teamwork. Sure, you admire this athlete and you admire the other one, but you know, most Americans understand that a winning team takes teamwork. That, yeah, some players are better than others, but the crucial thing that will make you win is not having one of the superstars, but having a relationship among the team players, that they all work together, that they have a collective idea, a collective feeling, that they support one another. And I think you destroy that if you give one of them wild amounts of money and don't give the others that amount of money. That breeds inequality, that breeds bitterness, envy, and that destroys communities. I think that's what it's doing in this country right now. Yeah, in the short run, the rich get richer. But you know something? In the irony of history, in the end, this kind of inequality, like it would on any sports team, destroys the team spirit, destroys the helping one another mentality that makes you win in the end. And so what you end up having is 2 or 3 stars and another bunch of people that are bitter about how they're not recognized, and then the whole thing falls apart.
Dr. Wolff, last questions. What would you have liked me to ask you that I didn't ask you to make this even better?
The only thing would have been, and you did ask me, so this is more my fault than yours. What can we do? And let me end with this. We don't need to run our enterprises the way we do. That's the root of our problem, in my judgment. We allow a tiny group of people, the owner of the company, the person who started it, if it's a corporation, the board of directors, usually a group of 15, 20 people. They are a tiny minority, but they sit at the top of the factory, of the office, of the store, and they make all the decisions and they have all the power. The rest of us are employees. They are the employer. That's not democratic. We don't vote for them. We have no power over them. If they don't like us, they fire us. Not only do we lose our job, we lose our income, we put our families in danger. This is a fundamentally unfair, unjust system. Here's the irony. If Americans were half as committed to democracy as they say they are, they would institute democracy in the workplace. One person, one vote, we all decide what happens in this factory, in this office, and this store. And guess what? We would never democratically decide to give one person $200 billion while the rest of us cannot pay for our kids to go to college.
Professor Dr. Richard D. Wolff, author of The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so kindly for being on Politics Done Right. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too, and thank you for your program, which is an important part of the national conversation.
I hope you enjoyed both of our guests today. We try to make sure and bring you both local and national information. We accept contributions of any size, any kind, but for this show specifically, we are offering, as I see it, class warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom, for a contribution of $120, or we are offering as well, It's Worth It, how to talk to your right-wing relatives, friends, and neighbors, also for a contribution of $120, and you can get them both for a contribution of $200. Call 713-526-5738. Again, that number is 713-526-5738, or you can go to kpft.org. And remember, we have people that are matching your gift. So you can be given to two. With your gift to KPFT, you're given to two organizations that actually are doing marvelous things here in Houston. Remember, this is your station. This is all about you helping us, making sure we get the message out, making sure we inform, making sure we make a better America. Folks, please give us a call, 713-526-5738. Talk about all of the times, can I make a difference? Yes, you can make a difference. I can make a difference. We can make a difference. 713-526-5738, or go to kpft.org. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right, and you know how I end this baby. I am what? Out! Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.